welcome back to Idol of Gork, Part 2. There was supposed to be a different episode here, but I made a new one. So Part 2 is Part 3 now. And this is Part 2, and it didn't used to be anything. So basically, the original plan, right? Recreate all of these terrain pieces that came with the original campaign supplement, right? But there's a problem with that, in that there's only 3 terrain pieces, but there's 4 battles in the campaign book. Wouldn't normally matter, I'm just here to make terrain, right? Partly, I've decided to expand the scope of this project, which is I'm doing the terrain stuff, but I've also decided I want to do the army stuff as well. I'm going to recreate the army lists in this book, and I want to try and play the battles in this campaign in the old world rule set, even though that's probably massively incompatible with the army lists. I'm gonna make it work. I think it'll be fun. It's a narrative thing, so I don't really care about balance. I just think it'll be a really fun project. But anyway, there's 4 battles. The second battle, Rutgar, knowing that the Idol of Gork and Mork are clearly the cause of some of their problems, he wants them disposed of properly, and so he calls for reinforcements. Predominantly, he needs a wizard, right? That's what he needs. He needs to make sure this is a magic thing. We need a wizard to deal with it. So he sends, someone off to go to Altdorf to go to the wizard's college and get reinforcements, and that happens. A wizard called Zorn decides to come along and go, yeah, okay, I'll dispose of it. He has a big retinue with him, and they're marching back to Rutgarberg to, dispose of the idols safely. Safely. We'll see. And they get ambushed by orcs, because the orcs know what they're doing, right? The orcs know that reinforcements are coming, so they want to stop that from happening. So there's a big ambush, but the thing that I'm missing from an ambush is a road that they're marching along, which is what today's episode is going to be about. So I'm Jord, welcome to my Realm Forge. So first things first, I'm going to need material to make the roads with. I'm going to use chipboard, which is kind of like cardboard, but it's thicker stock, it's more dense. It's better for this sort of thing, for bases. I'm measuring out rectangles of 3 inches by 6. I tend to use 3-inch measures as kind of the standard for everything that I do. If I need something smaller, then 1 inch is a good standard for that. That way, everything goes quite well together. Speaking of inches, the bottom of a Pringles tube is exactly 3 inches in diameter, so if you need a semicircle to extend out of a 3-inch wide road, then you have it. Why I need a semicircle out the front and into the back of each of these road tiles will become more obvious when we see them all cut up. To get a nice clean cut along the edge of chipboard, you want a nice sharp knife, and you want to go over it a good few times. Don't try and put too much pressure on it, because you'll just rip the chipboard. So I've cut that out of the video, because, cutting's the name of the game, apparently. And now you can see why the Pringles tin was such a revelation. Here you can see I will have a choice whether or not to have a straight road or a curved road. It gives me some flexibility. Literally, the road is now more flexible. I actually got the idea from a battle report over on the channel Tabletop Tactics. They were using a modular river tile set that used that same semicircle end. And I realised that makes for a really organic path through a battle map, so why not use it for roads? Our beaten country road is going to need plenty of cobblestones, and we're going to need them in odd places, no real pattern to them, which means we're going to have to do it by hand. So I am cutting out a bunch of tiles out of EVA foam. I'm stacking up several pieces of foam together in strips so I can cut out a few pieces at once. They will have some jagged edges, some, smoother edges, but it's fine. They will all look slightly different as a result of them not really stacking up very cleanly when I'm cutting them. I eventually cut loads of them out of EVA foam and also out of cardstock, which is the same stuff that Warhammer kits come in. I think those were blood letters, and also strips that I'm going to cut into rectangular cobbles for the edging, and I'm measuring out their placement now. But if you are having to cut thousands of tiles all at once, I do recommend you use editing, because that speeds things up a heck of a lot, and it helps you get to the thousands of pieces that you need very, very quickly. The next stage will be to glue all of these pieces down to our road tile, but first I want to clean my palette, and I included this because it's the most satisfying thing in the world. I mean, I'm sure everyone gets a kick out of this, right? Just peeling a huge amount of acrylic paint and glue off a plastic palette. It's so satisfying. It's just the greatest thing in the world. That's the good stuff. And while I did say the next stage was gluing, I realised that before I glue the tiles, I am going to need to bevel the edges. This is something I do to most of my terrain. I bevel the edges with a knife As I did just tell you, you have to go over chipboard several times with a knife to get a clean cut. Actually, you can use a sawing motion if you are going at an angle. Just make sure that you stack up a few pieces of card or something so you're not cutting into your cutting board, because if you're doing a sawing motion with a knife, you will just trim, you will bevel your cutting board, basically. Don't do that. You don't want a beveled cutting board, that's silly. Also, you can see now I am applying the glue with whatever, use whatever you like. You can use a brush, you can use a stick, it's PVA glue, you know, knock yourself out. And then I will be applying the square tiles. So I have some rectangular ones, some circular cobbles. I want a mix of the two, so I can have the edges of the road look one way, and then the middle of the road look different. Add some visual variety, and it helps kind of, you know, denote where the road sort of begins and ends. I kind of enjoy them having a bit of a border there. So I'm using tweezers to actually put them in place, so I avoid getting PVA glue over all of my fingers, since I don't want to be stuck to everything I'm working on. So I actually trim the points off the convex side of the tiles, because I realised that was biting into the edges of other tiles, so I wasn't able to rotate them around each other quite as easily, so that remedied that. Here I am dumping the tiles directly onto the glue in a completely slapdash fashion, and then I'm going to slowly just push them and move them, jostle them into position around each other to make it look like cobbles. But I don't want them to be a full set of cobbles. This is a rural road. It's supposed to be out in the middle of the borderlands. It's in a state of disrepair in the middle of nowhere. I want it to look like that, and so I want to make sure that I'm not putting too much care into their placement. It'll be a random amount of tiles in fairly random positions, largely dictated by where they land. However, I am trying to keep the EVA foam tiles down the middle of the road, and I'm trying to put the cardboard ones along each side, so that way it gives the impression of either that curve for drainage or the natural wear and tear from cartwheels or foot traffic or whatever else. And so I do that multiple times. And I even make a crossroads tile with all of the rounded attachments poking outwards, so that way if I didn't attach anything to that side, they would still look natural. But the thing that is very evident with that tile, and to a lesser extent all of the other ones, is that it is bowed. The PVA glue, gluing all the materials down, has actually warped the card slightly, but you can fix that by warping it back the other way, the same way you warped in the first place. More glue. So I repeat that step with every piece until they're all bowed back to normal. So now that they're all dry, they're all lying flat, too flat. I need to give them some texture, so I'm going to get some tin foil or aluminium foil or aluminum foil. Alright, just foil. I get some foil. And then I scrunch it all up into a ball as scrunchy as possible. This is going to give us our texture that we're going to use to apply a rocky texture to the cobblestones. So the cobblestones will look like they're made out of stone. Oh look, a gun! Hey guys, Jord from the future here. I guess the past as far as you're concerned, but the future with regards to the... I'm in the middle of the edit, basically. And what you're about to see is a bunch of past me experimenting, trying to do something. So the plan was, right, use a heat gun, right? This is a heat gun. It makes heat. And it's a gun. It'll heat things up, but like a lot. It's very hot. And the plan was use it to melt the EVA foam, or soften it at least, that we made the cobblestones out of. And then, when they're nice and soft, to use scrunched up tinfoil to roll the texture into the tiles, right? So that way the cobblestones will have that stone texture. And what you're about to see is me probably going a bit mad, trying to figure out if that is going to work. So enjoy. But mostly though, make sure you remove flammable things. All the flammable things must go. Okay, they have to leave the room and be patient. Yeah. Oh, also wear a respirator, because I can definitely smell like burnt plastic smell, and that's probably taken a few months off my life. So, you know, do that. Okay, good. So the heat gun, I don't think it's going to be worthwhile. I think it would matter more if, like, I was just going to paint these and call it a day, but I'm not. The next few steps are probably going to disguise any impact that the heat gun might have on the tiles anyway. Spoilers, they do. Cobbles, you know, whatever. So yeah, I'm not going to bother. I'm not going to bother the heat gun. I thought it was an interesting idea. I thought I'd explore it, but I don't think it's like an impactful enough change to warrant burning the house down. So I'm just not going to do that. Cool. Anyway, carry on. It's always worth experimenting. Except then, which wasn't worthwhile at all. But now we know. Anyway, next step. This is what will destroy all of that hard work. Which is the next step is to get some wool filler, where I'm using poly filler. You know, other brands are available. And I'm mixing some up with water. We're going to make a paste, which I'm going to paste over all of the work we've done so far. It's not great for your hands, which is why I'm wearing gloves. But also, it's just a bit icky, isn't it? It's just a bit icky. Ugh. So here I'm introducing sand. While it's still wet, I'm sprinkling sand over it, and then I'm going to work to smooth out the cobbles afterwards, so I can get most of the sand sort of in between. But in hindsight, and even now I don't notice, I end up doing all of my tiles in this same kind of wrong method. Put the sand in with the polyfiller. Honestly, it's much better. You'll get a much more natural look, because I'm trying to get the sand to embed into the polyfiller anyway, so I may as well just put it in at source, right? So if you're going to repeat these kind of steps, then learn from my mistakes. That's the point, okay? All of this is a learning exercise. Here I'm using a damp brush to smooth out the cobblestones. This will get most of the sand and the polyfiller off the surfaces of them so they can remain, well, looking like cobblestones. And all of the dirt and detritus, all the excess material, will sit between them, and it'll just make it look a lot more natural. So that's the plan. Though I later realised that just using a damp fingertip you can get much better results, a lot quicker, you have a lot more control over it, and you can just feel your way around the tiles. It's good, it works out well. Unfortunately, it was only this far into building all of the tiles that I realised I did want the front edges of all of them to be beveled as well, because I think that'll be more natural an end point for any tile that doesn't have another one coming off the front of it. So if I am just going to have a road stop in the middle of a field or wherever else, I want it to be flush with the table, you know, or at least graduate into the table. And here you can see me repeating the same mistakes with the sand and polyfiller as I did with the first tile. Though by now I had developed the fingertip method of smoothing. It also has the added advantage that you can control the pressure of it a lot better, and the EVA foam, you can push it down and it'll spring back up to some degree. So you can actually push your finger between the tiles to flatten out the polyfiller. And because I hadn't put the sand in with the polyfiller, I then had to use scenic cement to try and seal it all in place, or else it was just going to keep coming off forever before I primed it. My choice of primer for terrain is always PVA glue and black gesso. The gesso is a canvas primer, so paint will adhere to it really, really well, and also it dries very hard. The added PVA glue will actually lock everything in place much better. You know, it's glue, it'll glue everything together, it'll make sure that nothing will come off of your model at any point, or at least, you know, far less likely to than if you're just relying on the gesso. It's also nice and flexible, so your models will have a bit of give without the paint job sort of chipping off or anything. And here's proof that it's required. I'm currently chipping off all of the polyfiller from my mat so that I can clean it up nicely. So, you know, a tidy workspace is a happy workspace, or something. And another result of the misstep of putting the sand in afterwards, even with all the steps of sealing it in, it still chipped off, and you can see these little flecks of green everywhere, so I'm having to paint black back over those. And, you know, hopefully with all the rest of the paint job, we won't have that problem as much, but yeah, it's going to be a curse with this terrain, I think. And so first off, I grab burnt sienna. Secondly, raw sienna. But basically I need light and dark brown will do. Applying those two colours to the palette next to each other, I can take from either and sort of mix in the middle, so I can get, you know, some variance. I'll just mix a slightly different amount each time. And with a fairly wet brush, I'm stippling it all over the muddy areas. So that way the fairly thin paint will soak in really nicely, and it'll just kind of stain everything more than colouring it that colour. I just want to give some variance to the black. And now with Prussian blue, which is a very dark blue, I'm again very watered down, just stippling it onto a bunch of the stones, because stone is actually very varied in colour. Having some blue tones in there won't even consciously be picked up on by most people, but it will just look more natural generally. And now I'm going in with a dry brush of titanium white. This is basically because doing pale on black is, is great and everything to build up those tones, but this is a shortcut for the rest of the dry brushing, which I'll be doing. Having a paler base means that the paint will, it'll show up more. The different colours will show up a lot better. So this is really just making sure that I give a base coat to all of the highlights, because the dry brush is going to pick up in the same places each time. So this is a nice shortcut to getting brighter tones when I add the next paints, like sunny skin tone. That's right, we're making flesh rocks. Okay, it's supposed to be a bit sandy. This is more of an overbrush, so it's a little bit thicker, but I'm not applying it over the entire road tile. Deep sky blue next. Again, those blue tones are also going to help make it seem more natural. You can start to see that variety in tones on the actual cobblestones now, because the dry brush is going to pick up the raised areas of the cobblestones a lot more than it's going to pick up the dirt in the recessed areas. So long as I'm using a large brush consistently for all of those steps. But now with dark sand, well, I'm doing the sandy bits, aren't I? I'm doing all the dirt, and I'm using a much smaller brush, so I can get between the cobblestones, and that's where I am focusing my attention. However, I am overlapping onto some of the cobblestones as well, and just nearby, some of the edges are going to get picked up by that sandy colour, and that's fine, because dirt gets kicked up onto the cobblestones. You're going to get dirtier cobbles next to the dirt. It makes it feel very natural, very easily, and very, very effectively. And now to add back some darker shadows into some of the recesses, I'm using a homemade ink wash. It's some brown paint, but it's mostly brown and black inks, water, and a little bit of fairy liquid, which helps break the surface tension, so it'll just run wherever it wants to, which is rather handy, because I'm just going to splotch it everywhere and see where it ends up. So it'll look most natural, and again, just add those different tones. So here I'm bringing out my ground cover of choice. It's Habitat Substrate. It's just shredded coconut. You can get it in any pet shop. And here I'm making a mud paste out of it. The PVA, if you just completely saturate it in PVA glue, it'll dry glossy, and that'll give the appearance of mud, frankly, but the texture is absolutely spot on for churned up dirt. For colour, you do actually need to add paint, because I actually forgot that step, and you can see me correcting it now. But you do need to add paint, because otherwise you're just going to get glossy edges with none of the substrate in it. Substrate isn't pigment, so you do need to add some pigment yourself, so you can have the muddy area being consistent. Or else the dry dirt just looks shiny. It doesn't look wet, because it's the same colour as the non-shiny dirt next to it, that's not how dirt works. Also, in case you thought I was being really wasteful with that, the mud texture and threw loads away, I actually didn't. Something that everyone should do is make sure you're not wasteful, because you never know what you might end up having lying around for later projects. I poured the rest of it out and just smoothed it out onto some tinfoil. I would have probably used greaseproof paper or something so it wouldn't stick, but I didn't have any, so there's still some tinfoil stuck to the back, but whatever. I can now just tear this up or cut this up and use it for other projects, or add it to miniature bases or something. It'd be easy enough to blend into a base, just surround it in static grass and it'll probably look great. So there you go, now I have a sheet of mud that I can apply to things. So, always save this stuff, it's useful. And then I'm going to add a lot of that same substrate around the outside, just dry, not in a big mixture of PVA, just stuck on top. And that will actually help sell the whole area, because it'll make it look like the dirt on the outside is the same dirt that's getting trodden into the path. It just adds context to everything and a bit of consistency. So our next task is to apply the tufts. So this is where we're actually doing the inverse of what we've been doing for the rest of this build. Normally I've been going with the sort of bottom-up approach, but this time we're actually going with the biggest tufts, and then we're going to go with the smaller foliage around it. It'll be much easier to fill out the space around the big tufts when we're done. I find they look a lot more natural if you actually cut them up into smaller pieces and then put them around in different clumps, rather than them being just uniform in the clumps that they come on the paper with. Also, the glue that comes on the back of these I don't think is firm enough, so I do use a dab of super glue, and I use tweezers so it doesn't stick to my fingers. And you can see with all the tufts applied, they look a lot more natural, but we still need to fill out the rest of the shorter foliage. This is the same little tray that actually tufts came in originally. It's the same tray that I use for all of my models, where basically it's just an amalgamation of all the crap that I have in my basing box. So it's lichen, static grass, leaf litter, sand, flock, it's everything, and multiple colours of each, and I just sort of add extra bits when it starts to run out, and just slowly just keep topping it up, so some things deplete a bit, some things I have a bit more of sometimes, and it adds just a sort of a nice natural variance over all my models. For colour theorists out there, think of it as the mother colour. You can just add more browns or more reds or more greens if that's what you want for that particular miniature base. So that way, if you want a more autumnal look for a particular, regiment, that's fine. But because most of the material will be shared across all of your models, they will all look as though they are part of the same battlefield. So while I applied PVA glue to areas of the tiles where I wanted, very well-intentioned flocking to be stuck down, I also sprinkled a load of flock just all over all the models, and I am tapping them down, so that way the cobblestones will be free of all of the flock and sand and grit and things that I've sprinkled on top of it, and it'll go into all the recesses in a more natural way. I am then spraying all of it down with scenic cement to seal everything in place, so this will give the most natural finish. So it's flock pretty much thrown in at random at the end there, and a little bit of physics to nudge them into the right places. And once it's dry, we're done. Stick around to the end for a teaser for the next video. So rather than just having the road tiles spin around on a little turnstile, I figured I'd put them actually in a little scene with a bunch of other terrain, a bit of a skirmish table, because that's probably how I'm going to be getting the most use out of them, to be honest, up until we have our Idol of Gork battles. But let me know if you want to know how to make any of the stuff here, because I'm open to ideas that'll sit sort of outside the purview of the Idol of Gork thing. I do want to do other videos too, And also, if you have strong opinions on whether or not I should leave in mistakes in these videos, let me know. I think people can learn a lot from the mistakes I make, and understanding why something is a mistake I think is incredibly valuable to understanding the materials that are sort of, being utilised. So I think it's useful, but also it does make the video a lot longer. So let me know what you think, because again, I am happy to form this channel largely based on what people want to see and what people are interested in. So do please let me know. And while we're here, I do need to thank my patrons, Neon Nikki and Derek Edge. Thank you so much for supporting the channel. It's amazing, it's such a fledgling channel to have support from people already. So I really appreciate it. Thank you so much. And for the rest of my viewers, if you happen to want to be appreciated by me, then you know what to do. Patreon is down below, right, in the link, in the descripty boy. Go click the thing. You can join for free just to get updates on posts and things. So you don't actually need to be a paying member to be a member. You can go there for updates. I'm posting works in progress and all sorts on there. You could even give me a few quid if you wanted to, but go join anyway. And what I promise is the final call to action. I know there's been a lot, okay, but it's a new channel. I'd love to get feedback and things. But anyway, comment, like, and subscribe. Do the YouTube things. But more importantly than that, share it with your friends. If you think there are people in your gaming group that might appreciate a terrain building video or something, then just send them my way, or send the channel to them. Send someone somewhere. Make sure that them and the channel are in the same place and they look at the stuff. Do the things. I trust you.
Next time in the Idol of Gork.